anytime soon.
Right, oh, hang on, got it. Let us know when we're in, mate.
Okay, we're on. I would recommend everybody, if you're watching the live stream, mute the YouTube.
Let me know when you put the link in and I'll start sharing it because I've been blitzing it all day. I'm not going to be able to get that again, but people might follow us to the Telegram or the Facebook.
Okay, I'm going to put this in the chat
I'm
now.
not on YouTube, so is everything we say here just going on to the YouTube at the same time?
Yeah, you are live.
There's a slight time delay.
Yeah, but I don't need to do anything.
No. You just need to be there and have opinions.
Yeah, that's what I was going to do anyway.
We're all good then.
Yeah. Is Terry with us? I've seen his name pop up.
He's dropped off the call.
I don't think he meant to come in.
Yeah, he said he weren't coming because he had a cough.
Right. Just going to advertise this around the place.
If anybody's listening right now, we've had a little issue, so we're just amending that, getting ready, sending the link out to everybody who had a previous one.
And if anybody from the CWU leadership is listening, we will be talking about you.
In harsh terms.
Oh, we will. Oh, we will. Funny how like I shared it to a few of my friends, and now WhatsApp only lets you to share to a certain amount. Just seeing the live chat. Evening everyone. Evening Will. Evening Jerry. So everybody start sharing that, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Who have you got in the chat?
We got Will, we got Jerry, and we got Irish Partisan, who's our comrade over there in Minsk, Belarus.
Hello there, Irish Partisan.
Hello, I that's the name that I always recognise this from Alex's feed when you say hello to someone. Right,
Go on. We'll let it warm up for a bit. For those who aren't familiar with what we're doing, it's been almost a year now since the Class Consciousness Project was founded. So we are going to be doing a bit of a review of the year, hopes and dreams for next year, etc. Controversies, union sellouts, greatest ever sellouts, what we've learned in the last year, high points, low points, etc. It's basically everything you'd find on BBC or Channel 4, but much, much better because there's no Jimmy Carr involved.
And there are no adverts.
That's true. And good evening to Paul McCord.
We appreciate donations, but we haven't sold out yet.
Donations are also accepted in the form of high-grade booze.
He says as a single malt.
Yeah, I'm taking this for medicinal reasons because I've got a cold, and that's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, we did say bring your own beers because today we're having a celebratory drink, didn't we? We're all having a little drink to round off a really good year, I think, gents. I think we've had a really good year in what we've done.
Yeah, absolutely. I myself am on water because I'm night shift tonight, even though I'm unemployed, apparently.
Do we want to go straight into the critics there, Jason? Would we like to go straight
No, we can come to that later.
Well, let's talk about like we got started. It was in January of this year, and I think the guiding principle behind the starting point that we all arrived at was the two realizations. One was that reformism, which we'd all experienced in various different ways, was dead in the water. and going nowhere, and for the working class of Britain is an absolute dead end. And two is that the trade union hierarchy and organization is a fundamental barrier to class struggle, and more specifically, the development of proper class consciousness, hence the name of the project. And I think that's the point that I reached about a year ago. And I don't know if other comrades want to talk about how we began and also like what led them to this political point.
Well, I left the political party we were all formerly members of around about the same time as you did. I found myself very frustrated with some of the things that were going on within the party. There was a lack of accountability, there was a lack of transparency, and it seemed that a lot of the decisions that were being made within the party were being made by a small clique of people in one specific city in the country. And speaking as someone who has stood for public office in the past, I stood for councillor in 2014 for Tusk. I know that parliamentary means, or trying to get elected through the parliamentary system, be it as an MP or as a councillor, is extremely difficult for someone who is not from a major party. Part of which is because you don't have the support in terms of people to do the door knocking as relentlessly as you need to have an effect. And so it made me think, on top of what I experienced in the party I was in, that maybe parliamentary means bourgeois democracy, as I became familiar with, was probably not the way to go for people of our political persuasion. And so speaking as someone who had over 25, 30 years in the trade union movement and seeing class consciousness ebb away and seeing that the dominance of class as the main driver for politics in the left, to call it what it used to be called, I don't know what it's called these days, but to abandon class and go into identity politics was one of the key reasons why the left, in inverted commas again, was in such a bad place. And I think we were all to one degree or another of that opinion, and that we needed to rebuild class consciousness, hence the Class Consciousness Project.
Thanks, Jason. Chris or Rick, anything from you on our beginnings?
Yeah, I don't want to parrot what Jason said because it's a very similar story with the previous party that we were in. But one of the things that I found, one of the reasons why I came to this conclusion, was electioneering. Now, I didn't run for election, but I ran several campaigns, and I was trying to convince people on the doorstep to change their mind on the correct decision they've already made, not to even bother with those that were running in this parliamentary system, that they'd already come to realise that it's not working for them, it's working against them. It's a bourgeois system, and they may not use that word, but the terminology that they use is almost correct. Well, sorry, is correct. It's a bourgeois system, and it's not working to enrich the lives of the working class people. It's to enrich the ruling elite. And you go to the door and you're talking to people, and they just say, no, not bothered, no, not interested in that. So you're asking them to change their mind on a correct decision. Not only that, so when you go away from that, then you start to try and convince people of socialism as well. That socialism is something good, and communism is something good. It's something that where we need to be. The emancipation of the worker, and that, as we say, is creating a class consciousness, and that was lacking. They've understood that the system isn't working for them, but they don't understand why, and they don't understand what is happening and what is causing this, and why we need to, as workers, rise up against. And that's what I came to this position.
Chris?
Well, yeah, I was going to say as well, like Jason, I stood for local council in 21 and 22. And even though people would completely agree with you on the doorstep when you explain to them, this is what's wrong with our country, when they've explained their problems to you, what I eventually believed, I did get a few votes, but I thought, even if I got in a local council, it'd just be me. Because it'd still be full where I live with Labour Party members. So it's not a stepping stone to power. It's more of a stumbling block. It's like running into a brick wall. Even if you get that one council seat, you've got to deal with the other members of the council, and they've got much more clout behind them, much more means of getting themselves re-elected.
It wasn't
So,
just me as well, though, Chris, was it for you? It was actually the ex-Labour members who said they were fighting against Labour, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, the Church and Old Mafia. Yeah.
What did you say?
The Church and Old Mafia. But even if they got in, they'd just be one seat. Or even if all four of them got in, you've still got the whole rest of the council to deal with.
That brings up a good point, Chris, because Jason, you did a very good interview with Mandy Clare, isn't it? He's actually an independent councillor. And from listening to that, I got the impression that like what Chris is saying there is exactly right, without wanting to be negative about the work that she's doing. From what I got listening to that interview that you did with her was that she's having to essentially work her arse off and run at 100 miles an hour just to stay still. With the machine working against a very vicious local Labour Party working against her, and like basically you're having to do a ton of work just to keep your head above water. So the question is for us, I'm not talking about her because she's got her own projects. Like, was any of this a worthy endeavour? But Jason, I don't know if you want to reflect on that interview you did and what you took from it as the guy who was doing the work there.
Yeah, I mean that was the second interview that I'd done with Mandy, and when I'd interviewed her before, she had just left the Labour Party, having had a real hard time of it, being investigated and all kinds of other things, and ultimately her leaving the party. But the work, the real grind of being a councillor didn't end there, because obviously she stood as a town councillor, won her seat, and like you said, was relentlessly having to push back against the Labour Party, who were acting arguably against the interests of its own electorate on a daily basis in some cases. And yeah, I got the same impression as you. It seemed to me that being a councillor as an independent was a relentless grind to push back against a machine, be it a Tory one or a Labour one, doesn't really matter, but a machine that's designed to grind you out of existence. It doesn't want people like you there. And then it's added to, again, by factions in the independent side as well. You know, it's extraordinary what people will fall out over politically, even as independents. So, yeah, it doesn't, I mean, I wish, obviously, Mandy the best of luck in her endeavours, but you can see why people would be put off from standing as a councillor, even if they were to win. And it's hard enough work winning, but once you win, you have this endless, relentless grind just to be heard.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the same everywhere, but where I live, there are 3 councillors per ward. So even if you were one of them, the other 2 would probably be of the same party.
How much power do you actually have as an elected councillor in these Labour councils or Tory councils anymore? The power has been slowly deviated, hasn't it? You're there just to provide a budget and put cuts in, aren't you, essentially?
Yeah,
I mean, go on, Chris.
Sorry, I was just going to say that the point of a councillor shouldn't be to enforce cuts. It should be to make sure that the area where you live is nice. There's no dog shit. There's no litter. You know, the flags are all flat. Things like that. That is the job of a councillor. If they're not doing that, why are they even getting voted in?
Yeah.
I know you can get the odd issue about, you know, should we put this statue up or cut that tree down, which might, you know, upset or please certain people. But the basic job of a councillor is to make sure there's enough money that your ward runs effectively.
Hmm.
And that shouldn't really make a difference, no matter what your politics are.
Well, to draw on something that Rick said there, which is that councils in Britain have had their powers stripped away from them relentlessly since probably the early 1980s. So now, like, the government is basically in charge of your budget. Like, if I've got this right, you have to give the local revenue you take into them anyway, and then they give you back a certain amount in terms of a budget. So your revenue raising powers are very, very small. The government's got you by the balls, so to speak, on the finances front. And because essentially the individual councillor is depowered to the point where they might as well not turn up most of the time. Like, well, who does that attract? People who just want to coast on the expenses and don't want to do any of the stuff that Chris has said. It's like in Manchester, for instance, like several of the councillors in the poorest areas don't even live in the ward. They live in pretty decent looking flats in the city centre. So there's no actual representation there at all.
No.
When we were looking at campaigning in Chris's area the first time, do you remember looking at the area that had a certain councillor who didn't even live in the country, lives in Spain? I think he got dismissed in the end, but they were. If I knew we had this conversation, I would have come prepared with that. But you remember who that was, Chris? There was a Labour councillor.
That's not. That was in Netherton and Orrell, I think.
Yeah, near you though, isn't it? Near, essentially.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
But he was
His
collecting expenses.
name was Mike something.
Collecting a decent wad of expenses and working abroad. But that just shows how simplistic the job has been pulled into. And like you say, it's supposed to be a representation of the workers that are there. When you're looking at the recent elections for the DPRK, and they are essentially real representatives of their role, job, ward, whatever, for want of a better word. And they come there and then they represent, they bring the problems, and then they speak in the councils. And then here.
Yeah. So do they? Sorry, I don't know much about the DPRK. I just had a question. Do they have like a sort of bottom up system where if people in an area have got a problem, they'll ask their representative, and then that'll go up and up and up?
Yeah.
Is that how it works? Yeah. That's how it's supposed to work here.
Well,
but we have a more top-down system, don't we?
Yeah, it's how it's worked in a lot of the socialist states. Like the Albanian system was similar to that under the Enver Hoxha years, which was that even like as low down as like the local court to deal with like small scale like criminal matters, it would be an elected court of the local community. It would decide if somebody's misbehaved. Then it would be a community-based punishment that would be dealt out by elected representatives of that community. And they didn't actually have a lot of that kind of crime for most of the time of the existence of socialist Albania. But where it was dealt with in a democratic fashion. Like you would never get that in, like, supposedly America's got these systems whereby you can elect like district attorneys and things like that. But like, in reality, those people are completely controlled by party machines. They're not accountable to the voters at all. There's a huge distance between them. And so even the most supposedly democratic, like capitalist state, is never going to allow the working class to control serious forces of the state. So, for instance, they did away with, in this country, the council's abilities to control the local police in this country in the 1920s. Because prior to that, the policing boards, I think, had more control over like who was the local police chief, how policing was done in the area. As soon as the working class got the vote, the central government withdrew that power from local councils because it didn't want the great unwashed being able to say to the coppers, no, we don't like what you're doing there, or to removing a police officer. So they bureaucratized it as soon as the working class got the vote.
Well, that's interesting because I did some research after writing the article on how much I feel in comparison to the police. They are essentially created to, as the name says, police the working class. But a full nationalised police service in the UK didn't come until 1950s. So you still had police boroughs, so you still had whatever constables that were set for the area. but they were paid by the government from the 1920s.
Yeah, it used to be much more local. Now it got sent. The more political power the working class actually got, the more power was centralized away from them. So literally every move you make to advance a little in terms of democratic rights, the capitalist state will find a way to take it away from you again. And that is the same for trade unions as well. Every advance you make, they find a way to subvert. Every win you get is taken away from you, or they try to take it away from you within 5-10 years, or sometimes immediately. Which brings us on to the always popular subject of our relationship with the trade union movement. Now, we've been accused by members of a communist party who shall remain largely nameless, if unless comrades want to go there, of being anti-trade union. Now, this is the official Communist Party in Britain, who's labelled as this. They are the inheritors of the old CPGB. But Jason, I don't know if you want to start with this. Like, is the Class Consciousness Project an anti-union project, as our critics allege?
No.
Good answer. Let's move on.
No, right, okay. To criticise the trade union movement after the way they've acted in 2023 should come as no surprise to anyone who's involved in the trade union movement at any level. You know, if you were a rank and file member of the Royal College of Nurses, the Communication Workers Union, or the National Education Union, you would be as pissed off as we were at the actions of your bureaucrats that run your union, because they led 3 of the biggest collapses in trade union power we've seen this year. And the worst culprit, if you're going to pick a top 3, is the CWU, because the CWU, lest we forget, began a strike or a dispute with Royal Mail in May of 2022. They had strike action all the way through the year, right up until Christmas last year. They did a reballot of their members. They had a 90% vote in favour of further strike action, and yet did not take one single day of strike action in 2023, and buttoned up a dreadful deal which they sold to their members in June of this year. Now, if we can't criticise the trade union for doing that, then what can we criticise them for? I mean, just to capture the argument as succinctly as I can, we are not anti-trade union. We believe that trade unions do an essential good for working class people. But if that goes so far as to say that the NEU didn't sell out the teachers, or the RCN didn't sell out the nurses, and the CWU didn't sell out the posties, then I'm afraid you're mistaken, because they did all of those things.
Well said, Jason. Anybody else want to chime in on our critics?
I'd jump in with Jason there and say I think we are fully for trade unionism, but we are against the trade unions that support British capitalism, essentially. And when you see things happen like C21, Composite 21, which was the trade unions pushing for support for fascists in Ukraine against miners in the Donetsk who once supported the MUN, whatever you would call it now. Essentially, it's not the same union, is it? How many members did you say when you looked it up was in the MUN?
Oh, it was about 80.
Yeah,
about 80 members. So basically, there's a sort of rump left that manages the miners, not the miners' pension fund, but the NUM's staff's pension fund and things like that. And he's looking after what assets they've got left.
Well, the miners in Donetsk, when Scargill was taking them out on strike, were supported. The MUN was supported by those miners in Donetsk, weren't they? And in 2023, they pass a motion to further attack and support those people in the Donbass. It's repugnant. So, but I can't get my words out on how disgusting that is.
Support American and British imperialism.
Yeah, well,
you know, it's quite a low ebb for the trade union movement. 2023. I can't think of a time where they've been worse, to be honest. I mean, you know, one could argue about some of the actions of unions like the EETPU during the miners' strike and the Wapping strike that followed in '86, but they were not a complete outlier, but they were off the beaten track from the rest of the trade union movement. But this was I mean, we talk about C21 at TUC in October. We're talking about it was the British Food and Allied Workers Union and the FBU were the only two unions that voted against that motion. There was a clutch of others, including my former union, TSSA, the Transport Salary Staff Association, that broke their own policy by abstaining on that motion. The RMT abstained, allegedly because of involvement from the CIAWL, despite the fact that they had an emergency motion put through TUC Congress in 2014, raising TUC's concerns about when it was all kicking off in Ukraine in 2014 with the Maidan Revolution and all that sort of thing, and the burning of the trade union building in Odessa. And yet, in 9 years, it's gone to from actually pushing through an emergency motion through Congress, raising concerns about what's happening in Ukraine, to not even having the balls to vote against a motion supporting British and US imperialism. It's quite a slip. It's quite a fall.
Well, yes. I mean, I first got involved with the trade union movement in 2009, and the degeneration that's taken place in the last 14 years is quite astonishing, really.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that the government's been relentlessly on the attack against certainly the public sector unions, but the way in which there's been this complete slide into capitulation, when in actual fact, the position of the government has got weaker. Like the position of like the Sunak government and before it, the Johnson government is far weaker than the Cameron government was 10 years ago. Like the problem is that whereas they've weakened, the leadership still hasn't got a clue. Their only idea is to get workers or tell workers to vote Labour. And if Keir Starmer tells them, well, you better be moderate because otherwise we won't get in, and then you'll be to blame for having the Tories back in again. That and the promise of an ermine robe for Dave Ward makes them all cave in like a badly made meringue, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
We need to mention the complete and utter repugnant way that Mick Lynch has led everyone down a merry road, thinking that he was this great saviour. I think a lot of people in the RMT knew better, didn't they? But the vast swathes of the left thought that he was the new left idol. And then when it came to the crunch, you say, well, when we need change, when we need to make change, vote Labour.
Yeah, that's right.
The party that promises no change whatsoever.
Yep. Reformism without reforms.
Yes.
Just five penny increases on your wage for the rest of your life.
Well, it's not even an increase, is it? Like,
no, it's not. No, you're right. I know where you're going.
Yeah. So the other thing to mention in passing is, of course, that with the Donbass miners supported the NUM all the way through 84 to 85 strike. Guess who went over to the Soviet Union and tried to persuade the Soviet trade union leadership to abandon support for the miners? Give you one guess.
Surprise me.
It's a certain Baron Kinnock.
Oh, Baron Kinnock of Bedwellty, surely not.
Baron Kinnock of Bedwellty went to the Soviet Union in like late 84 and tried to persuade them that they'd misunderstood the dispute and that the miners didn't need any support. So that guy, who his entire career was essentially as a parasite on the union movement. He was a trade union education officer in the Welsh Valleys. Then he was a union-sponsored Labour MP. Then he was Labour Party leader. His entire career was thanks to the union movement. And what does he do? Every chance he gets, takes a giant dump all over the working class and then basically takes a big job in Europe and cashes in. Yeah. But he's hardly unique in that.
No.
Well, this is the hilarity, isn't it, when people say that the Labour has been taken over. We need to get rid of Starmer to return Labour to what it was. We'll just look back in freaking history. Yeah. Corbyn himself was a reformist, wasn't he? He wasn't truly after socialism, he was a social democrat. But slight revere from the change, wasn't it? Slight move from what Labour is. But essentially, they're no different. They've never been any different. Starmer's just one in a million, isn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the truth about the Labour Party, and I must admit it was something I only came to a realisation about a little while ago, a few years ago, is that it is not, as some might have you believe, an essentially good party that gets taken over by bad actors. It's an essentially bad party that occasionally has good actors in it.
Mm.
And that is as far as it goes. If you look at Labour's history, going all the way back to its inception, it has been all about protecting British imperialism and then acting as a loyal stablemate of American imperialism in the post-Second World War period. It hasn't changed. There are some that might have you believe that it completely changed under Corbyn. Anyone who was in the party at the time, like me, would have told you almost nothing changed when Corbyn was the leader. And the changes for the worse that some might have you believe that Blair and now Starmer have committed are not real changes. They're just a change of personnel and nothing more. Not a change of policy in any way.
No, not at all. Shall we catch up with some comments from the audience, comrades?
Yes.
Yeah, go
If
ahead.
we've got some, yeah.
Very serious and angry there, didn't we?
Yeah, well, it's what the audience comes here for.
Yeah.
All right, so we have got Georgina, who says, spot on, comrades. I'm ashamed to have been in the Labour Party, especially now reading Comrade Hap Albra's Social Democracy, the Enemy Within. So somebody who agrees with our position
Very good
there.
book, and I'd recommend it to anybody.
Yes. Jerry says, calling it class consciousness is exactly right. Well, maybe we can return to that theme. Dylan Blake says, there is an assumption that all independents are left-wing, which isn't the case where I live. Well, that's a good point.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Yeah,
I did see that. Paul McCord, who's in the chat, he knows this point because there was a person around his area that came from the Tory party and then went as an independent and seemed to be seen because he was an independent, was left-wing. Just because you are not part of some kind of party doesn't mean essentially you're going to be any good, does it? You could be running right-wing off on your own back, can't you? It's a strange assumption. It is a strange assumption.
Yes, yeah, it's right. Yeah.
Well, with the Church Road Mafia by ours, they're all some kind. They just come across as like a sort of alt-right sort of people,
Really?
and they literally they're on the border of four wards, and they only seem to care about what happens in that little cross section. They, amongst other things, they didn't even want a footbridge rebuilt after it was knocked over by a lorry because it's an eyesore. It's in the middle of a fucking dual carriageway. So it's not in the middle of like a beautiful meadow. So how is a footbridge an eyesore?
Do you know what, Chris? Sorry,
there's a lot more. Sorry, I'm just going to say there's a lot more going on with them than what they let you believe. And I have shown you some of their leaflets. They have like pictures of Doctor Who and Daleks and dinosaurs on them for no particular reason. They are just fucking head the balls.
He doesn't mince his words. Go ahead, lad. Can I just throw in something on that, Chris? I think you'll agree with me. I love looking at pictures of brutalist architecture. I really love looking at it.
I'm not a fan of brutalism, to be honest. But
I think you'll agree with me point that I'm saying. I think, but a lot of parts of brutalism is basically because it's more necessity over aesthetics. So like certain types of stairways, certain shapes of buildings, etc., etc. So whereas the type of buildings that me and Alex whinge about in our city, the big 3D flipping, 3D cladding, is it called? 3D, what do you call it? The way they're using these new plastic buildings, like the new Royal in Liverpool.
I'm not sure of the term.
Yeah.
I think I know what you mean.
Terry would know.
Yeah,
it looks like they've like glued bits of rubble to the outside.
No, it looks like plastic. Looks like silver, shiny crap that belongs on one of those cars that you ride on in the supermarket. You know what I mean? You put £1 in for your kids. The crap. But the brutalist architecture, essentially at the time, pursues more efficiency and need than aesthetics.
But I still think under a planned economy, we could have aesthetics and need.
Of course we could, yes. I agree.
Because there's no reason why we couldn't have like Palladian architecture in the, when was it, the 1700s. That looks nice. So why can't we just have that everywhere or in more places?
Well, that raises the question about like, who do you build buildings for? If you want workers to become the ruling class, then you've got to your architectural style's got to match that, you know?
Yeah, well, I'd say that at the end of the day, your architect and your builder are workers, and they
Yeah.
shouldn't just be building beautiful palaces and government buildings. A normal person's home should look nice inside and out, as
Yeah.
well as being functional.
Yeah, there's no reason why workers can't have that. The reason why we don't is because it's a for-profit system, and B, the people who make the decisions think that workers' living conditions aren't worth the money and the time and the effort to make it something which people actually want to live in.
Yeah, because I'm not saying that every person's home should look like a miniature cathedral, because that, to be honest, would be a bit much just to look at and take in. But there's no reason why a person's home can't be solidly built and look pleasant. In the way that, even just go back to the Victorian era, you see rows of miners' cottages, little terraces, they look nice and they're solidly built. And that kind of standard should just be everywhere for a person's dwelling.
Yeah, well, they've actually done away with and knocked down a lot of the better built houses in Manchester and Salford over the last 20 years and replaced them with like shiny glass and plastic bullshit, basically. And I've lived in some of these like flats that are so poorly made, like the walls wobble when you lean on them. And like your hand comes away with like dust of paint on it because they're like the paint's so cheap. But that's the style they go for in like Manchester developments now. It's like it looks impressive for about 8 minutes until you actually look at it, and then you can see how cheap it is and how quickly it's going to fall to pieces.
It's repugnant as well because in
fair coat and no knickers.
in Manchester, similar to Liverpool, you've got the beautiful old architecture, you know, and when you put this crappy looking, fast built, cheaply made crap next to it, it's just awful, and it makes it look so awful. I went to Manchester to see a friend just before we had the Wigan Diggers, and I walked to St Mary's Place with the church at the end, and that's just lovely. All the old buildings there in the little square, that was lovely, absolutely lovely.
Yeah, so, I remember. Sorry,
go on, Chris.
I just remember. I remember working at the DW Stadium once. And I walked from there to Wigan. You know, well, like, you know, it's a proper Wigan. It's in the middle of an industrial estate. And I just come out of this industrial estate onto like beautiful, it looked like the set of Coronation Street. All these lovely little terraced houses. And they must have been at least 100 years old. And you see it in Chester as well. There's loads of houses like that. And there's no reason why that style can't be put everywhere. It's well built.
Yeah.
And I'd imagine they're quite warm inside because the Victorian terraces are a lot warmer than a new build because they're insulated properly. So some of them have like double layers of brick, don't they?
Yeah.
Right. Moving on to our next comment. Jerry says, our council is dreadful, complete mafia outfit. Well, that could go for every council up and down the country, I think. Certainly Manchester Council is a one-party state with 96 Labour councillors. Sorry, 95 Labour councillors and 1 Lib Dem. That's it. So
where's Jeff's council?
Who's?
Jeff, who just got in touch.
All right, you're looking further down there. Well, maybe you can answer that in the chat. Ian says, used to have the rose-tinted glasses about the Social Democratic Attlee Labour 45 to 51 period, but was totally cured of that foolish notion when reading Robert Clough, Labour, a party fit for imperialism, which is also a good book.
That's a book that pops up in conversation quite a lot, isn't it? That one. It was, I've got to be honest, it was a revelatory book for me when I read it about nearly 4 years ago. the simple thing I would say about the post-war period between 45 and 51, with the introduction of the NHS, the welfare state, the nationalisation of the railways, the coal and everything else, who paid for it? Who paid for it? That's the question.
Mm.
Do your digging around and you find out who really did pay for it. Partly it was us, but it was also the working class in the colonies. They paid for all of those things.
This is exactly right. Especially in Malaysia, what's now Malaysia, with increased exploitation of like their lumber and their rubber supplies, which is part of what caused the Malaysian insurgency, which was brutally put down by British forces, some of which were led by a certain Paddy Ashdown, long-term MI6 asset and Liberal Democrat leader.
Yes.
Absolutely. One of the problems with, one of the things that they wanted from Vietnam was to keep hold of the rubber fields, wasn't it? The French had it, and then the Americans wanted to get it, also to stop the spread of communism. You know what I mean?
Well, yes, the old domino theory, the idea that if the working class and peasantry saw a successful revolution in one country, it would sweep around the world, which is true, it can do, which is why they were so brutal in trying to put it down. That's why they killed so many people.
It will happen in oppressed countries, won't it? You will see and you will admire, and then you will search for that same revolution yourself. That's why most of the countries in that region turns to the communist ideals, to Marxist ideals. And that's why there was places like Laos had one of the smallest regions with the most amount of bombs ever dropped. It's absolutely appalling.
And they still won.
Yeah, well, that's the best bit, isn't it? America has never won a war they've got into by themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
That's true.
So, Irish Partisan says, the episode of the Labour councillor living in Spain reminds me of the rotten boroughs of the 18th and early 19th centuries. Good analogy.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
I think basically Manchester's one giant rotten borough by this stage. Paul McCord says, Chris, do you want to come in?
No, it's okay. Paul McCord, that's our Paul.
Paul McCord says, the problem with many councillors and MPs is they're in it for money, a career, when it should be a vocation.
Yeah, that's probably true. There is a flip side to that, though, because I have a friend who was a Labour councillor in Stevenage, and because of the limits on allowances they would pay people, she actually lost money by attending council meetings. It left her out of pocket. And it could be that, apart from a lot of other things, but it could be that puts a lot of working class people off even bothering to stand for councillor, apart from the fact it's a complete ball ache trying to get yourself elected in the first place. Once you get elected, you can end up out of pocket for your trouble.
Unless, of course, you know how to play the expenses game.
Yes.
Which is, you not only get your expenses as a councillor, and this is all publicly available information that I found out years ago at the Manchester Council. You get yourself on half a dozen regeneration boards.
Yeah.
You get yourself on every non-job going, and then you claim every expense you possibly can, down to the last penny. And that's where you make the money. And you don't get put on those boards if you're an awkward bugger and raise difficult questions.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah, I think the mistake my friend made was she was an honest councillor.
Well, always a mistake, you know?
Yeah.
One of the great examples of that is Joe Anderson, Mark I, the original, who found his way into owning the mayor position.
Yeah. had
the mayoral wage, and when I was looking through councillor expenses, I was doing the elections. He had the maximum allowed, whilst earning. It's not a meager wage, a mayor's wage. It's a good wage, if I remember rightly. Not only that, having his hand in a lot of things, which I won't say on air. Allegedly had his hand in a lot of things.
Yeah. James Graham says, Zed. I think we all know what that's a reference to. Good evening to you. And Georgina says, I think this is with reference to the RCN leadership, that they are wedded to the Labour Party, which is absolutely true. Irish Partisan, our comrade in Minsk, says, at least you had the right to vote. My father's relatives who were Catholics in Northern Ireland weren't even given that right until 1970, which is a good point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You don't realise, like, growing up, like I grew up in like the 80s and 90s, and you like the so-called Troubles were just this thing on TV that was always portrayed as this sort of mad, irrational thing. It's only when you get much later on in life and you read more about it that you realize just how much like dirt the British state was up to there, and how much of it actually they brought back to use on the miners in 84 to 85. All the dirty tricks they'd used in Ireland, they brought back to Britain to use on working class people here.
Yeah.
Georgina says 100% the RCN were bad. They even tried to persuade us not to strike and then had to quickly change their minds. They had ads on social media as well as a mail shot prior to changing their minds. So the RCN put more effort into trying to persuade their members to accept a shit deal than they did actually building for strike action, it seems.
Yes,
Well,
they seem to,
rates.
especially in the latter stages of that dispute, they were flailing all over the place because obviously they recommended for acceptance the offer that was on the table, and then the members rejected it. So then they had to call further strike action. But I think in order to be as fair as one can be for the RCN, they were undermined by a lot of other unions, including the GMB, who had all accepted the deal weeks and months before the RCN, and I believe Unite was the other two outliers. They were the only two that were sticking it and saying, no, we're rejecting this offer. So as bad as the RCN were, and they were bad, and really people should be held accountable for what happened in the last few weeks of that dispute, they were not helped by this absolute plethora of other unions that all collapsed long before the RCN did.
And central to that, of course, and we've written a lot about this on the website over the last year, is the relationship with the Labour Party, isn't it? I mean, you can't get around that. That and the nature of trade union leaders under capitalism anyway is dodgy, but the weight of the Labour Party relationship is used to snuff out militancy every chance they possibly get. That's true all the way from 1902 up to today, and that really hasn't changed.
No, it hasn't. And the thing that needs to be borne in mind is simply because your union isn't affiliated to the Labour Party does not mean the Labour Party does not have an influence in it. There will be people at the very highest levels of your union who will be Labour members. Some of them will be Labour councillors. Some of them will be looking at a chance to become a Labour MP in the future. And all of that influence, even if you don't pay the Labour Party officially a penny, all of that influence counts for something. The RMT is not affiliated officially to the Labour Party, but it still gives money to Labour MPs on the condition that they follow their policies. So the influence is still there to a degree. It might not be to the same degree as, say, Unite or Unison or GMB, but it's still there all the same. And the tentacles of the Labour Party are intertwined with the Labour bureaucracy at every level, even down to branch level. It's an almost indivisible union between the trade union movement and the Labour Party.
Yeah.
And Chris?
So I was just going to say, that's why it makes me laugh, when the likes of the Daily Mail say that the Labour Party is controlled by the unions.
They've never been in one. They've never been in a trade union if they actually believe that. Never. I've been in trade unions 30 odd years, and to say that the Labour Party is controlled by the trade unions is a complete joke. It's completely the other way around. It might not be necessarily the leader of the Labour Party ringing up a trade union general secretary and saying, call this strike off, but then it doesn't have to be. There doesn't have to be that sort of influence. It's covert. It's cloak and daggers. It's all in the background. It's people like Dave Ward not wanting to make Keir Starmer look bad by taking the posties out in 2023 and instead buttoning up a deal. It's things like that.
I don't think that just stems to the unions as well. When you look at community groups, especially in Labour-led cities, you'll find a Labour MP or a Labour councillor doing a role, like friends of a certain place, and you'll find a well-known MP doing the finances of this group, and they're everywhere. They are, the creation of them is to make sure the working class don't revolt, they don't rebel. So they've got to have themselves in every position possible to make sure we don't, whether it be a community group, a trade union, or just some local activist group. There's a Labour man there or woman.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. A lot of people, when they got disillusioned with electoral politics, think that by going and joining a community organization, you can get around it or make a real difference. Now, possibly you can, but as Rick says, like all the community groups in Manchester, or a lot of them anyway, they're all getting money from the council, or councillors are involved with them, or it's a way you'll find that, like, if there's an able and capable working class activist who might, under different circumstances, pose trouble for them, they bring them in. They give them all the expenses. They put their arm around them and say, right, you can win X, Y, and Z for your ward if you'll do the following for us. Or if ultimately you'll come onto the council. Think of what you can do for your ward then if you're on the council and in this community group. And that's how they maintain control, partly anyway. Right. Moving on. Jerry, he says, massive support for the NUM miners and the miners in Donetsk. Very true. Irish Partisan says, I was absolutely appalled to hear of the NUM supporting the Nazis in Ukraine, given that in the 84-85 strike, the Donbass miners supported the NUM against Thatcher. Yeah. Very true.
Absolutely.
Georgina says, with reference to Kinnock, he's a total traitor. Ian Foster says, unforgivable class traitor. All very apt descriptions, quite restrained in actual fact when talking about his barren ship. James Graham says, the CPB/Morning Trot are sheepdogging union members to vote Labour under Unite's Reclaim Labour political strategy that came from Britain's road to socialism. That's all very true.
Absolutely. Yep.
If you're not familiar with the British road to socialism, it is an appalling document written by the original Communist Party of Great Britain back in 1951. So before Stalin even died, they committed themselves to essentially just being an adjunct of the Labour Party. And that's it. And then they went from having like 50-odd thousand members in the early 50s and a really solid base in like a lot of like very working class areas to withering away over the next 30 years because angry younger workers didn't see them as being something that was worth joining because they had joined what we call the Labour aristocracy. Don't know if anybody else wants to chime in on that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, the irony is that they became Khrushchevite revisionists before Khrushchev was even in charge.
Yeah. See,
maybe
Britain
they
can
taught
innovate.
Khrushchev himself a few tricks. I don't know, but yeah, it's a 72-year-old suicide note written by the Communist Party of Great Britain. It's like you said, it's an appalling document. It basically is the death knell of the revolutionary Communist Party of Great Britain, and just turned the party into an adjunct of the Labour Party.
Exactly. And still is to this day. And the CPB is not even the same party as the CPGB. It just inherited all the worst aspects of it.
Yeah.
So Irish Partisan says, it is worth noting that the Labour Party applauded the execution of James Connolly, the great Irish revolutionary. Labour also upheld the continued sectarianism in Northern Ireland for decades. Yeah, quite literally reinforcing a deadly division in the Irish working class over and over again. So, I mean, that's your party of organised Labour. I'll say no thanks, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I believe it was Harold Wilson's idea in his 1966 government to turn Northern Ireland into a dominion. Basically try and wash his hands of the whole thing and let them just blow each other up.
Yeah, it didn't quite work out very well.
No.
But it was, I mean, if you look at the type of people that the Labour Party had dealing with the occupied 6 counties, you had guys like Roy Mason, who was an ex-miner. He was from the ranks of the trade union movement, but a complete chauvinist and a pro-imperialist. And that was a guy that the Labour Party put in charge of, running the administration for the occupied 6 counties. And he was as ruthless as any Tory in defending British imperialism. And that's been true all the way down the last 100 years.
Yeah.
Right. Hello to Stephen Mulholland, who's joined us. Georgina says, P.S. It's Georgie. For some reason, I've got my Sunday best name in here. And Jerry says, my daughter is an ex-council post-war semi-detached with a large garden, and it's fabulous. Well, there's a lot of decent housing still out there. None of it built recently, I don't think.
Yeah. I think it's true that one of the best sort of houses one could buy, if they can find one, is a former council house on a corner plot. Because the amount of land you get, if you walk around where I live, And the number of ex-council houses on corner plots that have been extended to the point where they're basically mansions is unbelievable.
Yeah, exactly. It's worth bearing in mind. Paul McCord says, the building companies want to build cheap and fast for maximum profit. Very true. Just need to look at the Manchester skyline to work that one out. Paul McCord follows up
All
with...
the pools now.
Yeah. Paul follows up with, and the councils get a financial kickback from the builders called Section 106 money, which doesn't necessarily get invested back into the areas which they have exploited. So it's a racket, basically.
It's a racket.
Of course it is.
It's the only way you can explain perfectly serviceable council housing stock built in the 50s being demolished and being replaced with buildings that will be unfit for human habitation within 10 years.
Yeah. Well, that's regeneration.
It's obviously every point that is needed for life is always going to be used for profit, because it's continuous, isn't it? Anything you can take from the worker in the necessities of life to remove his bit of money, it's always going to be capitalized. It's always going to be used that way, from your water to your electricity to your household. Hang on, that house is all right, but we can put another 5 in there if we knock it down. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
The same thing happens with local pubs as well. This has happened quite a lot. Not very near ours, but around Merseyside. A pub shuts down. Nobody knows who owns it. Nobody knows what's going on with it. Then it suddenly catches fire.
Yes.
Yeah. And then flats get built there.
Yeah.
Yeah. The decline of social drinking is a real phenomenon, you know? It's only not only is beer now too pricey to buy by the pint, but also like the pub as a place of social gathering has retreated, I think it's fair to say, in recent decades.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean,
I still go.
Sorry, Chris. I was just going to say a lot of those pubs that you see burnt down are burnt down because they're listed, and they're listed as pubs. So they have a designated use. They can't be anything else.
Yeah.
And so you do an insurance job on it.
Yeah, I pretty much knew that, but it's not completely proven, so we can't say that.
Well, we're not accusing anybody directly.
That's what happens with a lot of buildings in Liverpool, allegedly. That once the bigger firms take over a plot that is listed or has something listed on it, you accept the fines every year until that building is completely unable to save, and then you can demolish it and build something on it. And that's true. It's true. It is true. Not proven, but it's true.
And as well, seeing as how we all know this is the case, you know, when you get vigilantes going out protecting statues of slave traders in case they get pulled down, even though no one actually needs a statue, why isn't anyone going out saying preserve our pub heritage and our architecture that's going to get burnt down by some big businessman?
It'd be a much better use of these people's time, you know?
And that's our heritage as much as a statue of Edward Colson. It's more of our heritage because it actually benefits the class.
Yeah. So, moving on, what have we got now? Good evening to Munis, who's joined us. Jerry says, when I was a Unison rep, we used to refer to the awful RCN rep as being the one who put the arse in RCN. Very good. Irish Partisan says, I was a card-carrying member of the Irish trade union SIPTU, which also served as a sheepdog for the sister Labour Party based in Dublin. I got a frontline lesson in trade union bureaucracy and back-scratching. Well, yes, it should be noted in passing that the Irish trade union movement might be even worse than the British one, but that's a pretty tight contest, to be honest. So, comrades, we moving on to look at the future, shall we say? There has to be a general election in the next 12 months. It was 4 years ago that the Corbyn project flew into a flaming pile of shit and exploded. And now we are in a situation where the Tories are useless, are drifting around, their own voters don't even like them anymore. And it's looking like Keir Starmer's going to get in by default, though there are contrary opinions on that. What do we think that this election brings for the working class in Britain, though? Because we're going to get, as we've been talking about all the way through this, a bunch of trade union leaders and trade union bureaucrats going on TV, online, on the radio saying, you got to vote Labour, otherwise you let the Tories back in. But what does a Keir Starmer administration actually mean for workers in Britain? Who wants to field that?
It means absolutely fuck all. And what we should be doing is not encouraging people not to vote. People should go down and spoil their ballots, because it makes literally no difference if the Tories or Labour get in. But if there are a million spoilt ballots, that is going to not completely overthrow the system, but that's going to send a bigger message than voting for any political party. Just draw a big cock and balls on your ballot paper.
I think Starmer's the scarier option for the working class, essentially. I think he is one of the most useful tools, no pun intended, of the establishment that has been there for a very long time. I think there's a lot of people in the Tory party that are more out for earning, and I think Starmer is more out for creating something out of himself, which could be construed into further wars, further destruction of the working class rights. You know, the Tories have been doing that since forever. But we've had a lot of bills passed, like the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act, similar type of things passed by the Tories. But I just believe that it's going to be more insidious under Starmer, because it's going to be Labour instead of the Tories. Okay, at least the Tories aren't in. That's what people will say. So they'll accept the lesser of the two evils. But Starmer will still continue to do those things, and he will continue to do it in a more insidious way. And it just makes me sick to believe that he would come in. I do believe he is. He is. I think he's going to be a large vote as well.
Jason?
Well, I think whoever you vote for at the general election next year, the ruling class will win. It's more than likely to be Sir Keir Starmer and his Labour Party that will be the party of government. I think that should worry working class people, because British capitalism is in a very deep crisis. And the only way it will restore any modicum of profitability to itself is by attacking the working class. And the best placed leader of the ruling class's government is a Labour one, because he will have the trade union movement in his back pocket, who will allow him to do pretty much whatever he wants. He will leave all the anti-trade union laws intact, all the other insidious laws that prevent protest and free speech, and he will come after the working class with the full force of the ruling class behind him. And it will be the trade union movement that will enable him to do that. And they will stand aside, in my view, and let him do that. So before you go to vote in your general election next year, think very carefully about who you vote for, because there are some trade union leaders who haven't even got the balls to say vote Labour. All they'll say is Tories out. But Tories out means only one thing, and that means Labour in. And Sir Keir Starmer has long been, all his professional life, a loyal and faithful servant of the ruling class. And that should be borne in mind when you vote next year.
Let's not forget Mr. Starmer there was pivotal in the arrest of Assange, wasn't he? In
Absolutely.
Assange.
Yeah.
And the non-arrest of Sir Jimmy Savile.
Yes.
Yeah.
So did Jim fix it for him? Let's just ask the question.
He fucking did.
Yeah.
Chris?
No, I was just going to say, he also failed to prosecute the police twice, when that Charles de Menezes got shot, and when that the Millwall fan got shot. No, sorry, not shot. It's on the back of the head when he was walking past the riot after he spent all day selling newspapers. I can't remember his name now. It's Ian Tomlinson. Sorry, yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah, Keir Starmer refused to prosecute the police over either of those deaths.
Yeah, he's been a faithful servant of the British state for his entire professional life. So he's going to, as Jason says, use the relationship with the trade union leadership to try and prevent struggle breaking out, and to try and put as many barriers in between and divisions in between the working class as possible, in order that they can be successfully attacked by the ruling class and try and restore profitability. That, and backing even more imperialist wars than the Tories are. I mean, you're in a weird place now where the Tories have got like more MPs going into print criticizing the Israeli regime than you have Labour Party people doing it. So like you have like Ben Wallace and people like that criticizing the Israeli regime, and Labour front bench is just 100% behind whatever it is that Netanyahu wants to do, because Starmer is an even more rabid imperialist than some in the Tory party are, which should tell us a lot. I mean, I think that, I don't know if we want to discuss this, but like the slogan, "Not one vote for Labour," might be something worth exploring, because like I would argue that a weak Tory government that scrapes in, or a government that is like complete chaos, is actually better than a strong Labour government, because a strong Labour government will be able to use its parliamentary majority and the trade union bureaucracy to ram things through that a weaker Tory administration couldn't.
Yeah,
No,
I'd absolutely agree with that. Yeah,
I'd agree with that sentiment. I'd like to bring up more of an anecdotal position with little Rishi Sunak when he went to see Netanyahu. Starmer, I don't think Starmer hasn't gone to see Netanyahu, has he? He hasn't gone over. That's before I met.
Think
I
so.
don't think he has. No. But Rishi Sunak, the most cringe-worthy, disgusting thing I've ever seen is him standing next to him, looking up to him like the bully in the schoolyard who's just become his mate. He was appalling, but it just proves how weak he is and the Tory party is. And like you say, even if they got a majority still, they still would be a very weak group just after funding. And like you say, is that going to be better than a strong Labour government, which would have the backing of people?
Yeah, and you'd be told over and over again, you have to put up with this, otherwise the Tories get back in, which is what, by the way, the entire British left do that. I mean, drawing on what Jason said, like you get all this stuff from like supposedly revolutionary socialist parties, like the SWP, Socialist Party, various other trot groups, and our friends in the CPB, and they all say Tories out. But as you were saying, Jason, that means vote Labour. That's but they don't even have the stones to actually come out and say that. They'll just say, "Oh well, Tories out," and like, but they don't follow up with anything, because they know very well it means vote Labour, but they can't say that without looking like complete shills.
Yeah,
but that's what they are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
If they turn around and say, "Don't vote Tory, don't vote Labour," Reid Fairey, ready for the revolution. That's what we want to hear, isn't it? That's what we want to hear.
A much better recipe, Right, I'll pick up on some more comments that have come in. Paul McCord says, the working class will be more disenfranchised than ever and will stay away from the polling booths, and people should follow Chris's advice and spoil their ballot or vote for a decent socialist. If there's one standing, then maybe. Not sure how many decent socialists are going to be standing next year. Right. Jerry says there has been since 2012 a project called None of the Above, to have those words printed at the bottom of the ballot slip. Well, that'd be an interesting diversion. I think a lot of people would tick None of the Above, which is the very reason they won't put it on there.
Exactly that. Yeah, the whole system would be thrown into chaos because people would vote for none of the above.
Yeah,
but as well, sorry, that is another way to spoil your ballot. You can literally write none of the above on it.
What would be the reaction of British capitalism to that? To either spoiling or none of the above, right? Whatever you're on, draw your big willy on it. What would be the reaction of British capitalism?
I really don't know. The only thing I know is that they have to read them out at the count. They don't have to say someone's drawn a cock and balls on this, but they have to say, 59 spoiled ballots, 1,000 spoiled ballots.
2,000 votes for Joseph Stalin.
Yeah, they wouldn't literally read that out But any ballot that hasn't been filled in properly has to be declared, and they have to say, 12 votes for Labour, 9 votes for Tory, 7,000 votes spoilt, 20 abstain, or
Blank.
not counted, or whatever. People who didn't turn up. It is it's a minor one, but it's a political action to spoil a ballot.
Yeah.
It's more of a political action than just not voting.
Yeah, because I don't think the Chartists had in mind when they were campaigning for votes for workers that this would be the choice in front of the working class, did they?
No.
No, they didn't think they were going to get a choice between a finger up the arse or a kick in the balls.
Make your choice. Right. Where are we now? Paul says, decent socialist, that is not standing for Labour. I think the Greens may make a few gains and a few independent socialists. Well, we'll see how that pans out. But I'm sure most on this chat would agree with us that the Greens are basically, they are yesterday's Labour Party today.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, they are. If I can give the Green Party even a scintilla of credit, it's for making late stage Corbynistas think they were actually a socialist party. So well done, the Green Party, for that.
Yeah.
Usual con job. Ian Foster says, Starmer is a former invited member of the Globalist Trilateral Commission. What he stands for is no secret. How anybody thought he was in any way progressive, it beggars belief. Well, yes. And those bodies like Trilateral Commission, Bilderberg Group, they're essentially like finishing schools and influence networks, largely run by American imperialism. That's what they all are. It's where their roots always are in the United States. And so you see someone who's going there, like David Lammy goes there all the time. What they're going there for is to be told, these are the latest ideas. This is what it'd be really good if you did. By the way, we've paid for a 5-star hotel and a prostitute of your choice. And by the way, we've got the photos.
See, I wonder which prostitute Nicole Sturgeon picked.
Answers, please, on the postcard to Class Consciousness Project, Shed 4, Essex.
The people those are in those groups, the likes of Macron, Trudeau, Sturgeon, Lucinda Ardern, or whatever their name.
Jacinda Ardern.
Yeah, these sort of come across with the liberal tendencies, don't they? And they're pushing such fascistic, disgusting viewpoints.
Very true. Right. Paul says, in response to Jerry, there should be a none of the above option, but that would make our voting system collapse, which is what the establishment don't want. Very true. They want to keep the idea of so-called democracy alive. They don't want to be revealed as running a dictatorship.
Yeah, it's the illusion. It's the illusion of democracy.
Yeah, it's a bourgeois democracy, which means their votes count, our votes don't.
And just going back to the someone mentioned about the Manchester being a rotten borough. Was it you?
Yeah.
But it was in response to something that one of the listeners said. It's the same in Liverpool, and it's probably the same all over the country, because we have a saying round here in Liverpool and Bootle. If you put up a sack of spuds with a red rosette on, they get voted in. So that ultimately means there is no democracy.
Well, that's
if people are just blindly voting for the colour that they like.
Yeah, when I stood for council 10 years ago, a couple of times, we found that the Labour Party would win most council seats on the strength of the postal vote. You get 2,000 votes in some of these Greater Manchester wards, and you've won the seat, and they would get that on the strength of pensioners doing a postal vote. By the time election day came round, the seat was already decided, basically. Right, so moving on, we've got Stephen Mulholland says, I certainly won't be voting Labour because now is not the time. I don't think it'll ever be the time, Steve, to be honest, ever again. Georgina says, I'm just going to spoil my ballot. Write on either vote Stalin or draw a very artistic rendering of, shall we say, an artist's view of a phallus. Lee Williams says, if you spoilt the ballot, they would stick who they want in power and then say you voted for them whether you did or not. Well, certainly they'd lie.
Yeah, but sorry, I'm going to say that that's not true, because when I stood for council, they counted the spoiled ballots in front of me.
Hmm.
'Cause I went to the count.
Would it change when it comes to the larger amount? Say 50% of the national ballots were spoilt. Would they lie about it? Would they? This is the question. What would happen?
Well, it would. I would argue
they
that.
might.
Go on, Chris.
So I was just gonna say they could, but if you were actually at the count, you would have witnessed what happened, because they have to declare them.
Well, also, I think. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, you can stand and bring a spotter with you, so there can be, or an observer, I think it's called, and the two of you can watch the count.
Well, I think the bigger thing would be if there was like a huge abstention rate or like a huge spoilt ballot rate. It would damage the legitimacy of any government that came out of it. So, like, if the turnout would be like 50% or less, that would be a hugely damaging thing for whichever government came out of it, because it wouldn't be legitimate. Under the laws that they've passed for trade union ballots, if you don't get a certain turnout, percentage of the turnout, a certain threshold, then the vote's invalid. So if you manage to get like massive amounts of abstentions and people just not turning up to vote, that would damage the legitimacy of any government that came out of it. Right, moving on. Right. Royal Mail being destroyed by greedy shareholders, says Cy London. That's correct. Lee says, I was referring to the whole question, if everyone spoilt their ballot, what would they do? Yeah. Paul McCord said, with reference to Nicola Sturgeon, she wore the schoolboy's outfit. I always thought Sturgeon was a little cranky.
Oh, God. Go ahead, lad.
Right. So towards our conclusion then, comrades, I think we should end on a note of, I don't want to say optimism, but I want to say hope, which is what the project's fundamentally about, which is like, we're doing our part, playing our part to like raise the level of class consciousness, because it's only when the class is fully aware of the fact that we are in a situation where struggle is unavoidable. Like a class war is being waged on you as a worker, whether you choose it to be or not, whether you're even aware of it or not. I would say, though, most workers are aware that they're getting fucked over. The amount of debt that they're in, the fact that they increasingly can't afford decent things. There's no political options for them. The trade union leaders don't do jack shit. A lot of people are aware of that. But then you got to go to the next level, which is getting organized to do something about it, which I think is like our objective with this project, is to try and get into organizing in working class communities to actually bring that about, making people go beyond just saying correctly, it's all shit, why should I bother, to we need another system, a system that is run by us for us. And that's where we need to go. And it's going to be a slow process, but I think the last year, 2 years has taught us, if nothing else, how quickly things can change. Like, nobody thought that the Americans would lose in Ukraine, and they are doing. Nobody thought that the Israelis would get caught out by the Palestinians, and they were. So like, things can erupt very, very quickly. And there's a lot of anger and frustration amongst working class communities out there at the moment. It's just that it's directionless, and it often falls into nihilism, or like it gets picked up by opportunists on the left and the right and channeled into dead ends, like, you know, riots over immigration, stuff like that. So what do we think about the coming year for like the building of class consciousness then, comrades, if you want to chime in?
I'd like to jump in. As we spoke about before, when you meet up and speak to people, just on the doorstep, but in around the area, just like you said there, there's a malaise, there's an anger. They understand that they're getting fucked over. It's just making people understand why. And I think a lot of the left dumb down the masses, dumb down the working class, and say they won't be able to understand. They won't know. It's like, well, of course they will, because look at us. We're nobody special, no special educations, essentially. Most of us don't really have anything past flipping high school, secondary school, to take away that Americanism there. But most it's easy enough once you realise what is happening to you to push forward with that. And once you understand, then you don't back away, do you? Once you realise why this is happening and what's going on, you can't back away. And I think that's the same for everyone.
As you said, Rick. Anybody else wants to chime in?
I'd just say, as much as I don't think we have gathered support from the what you might call an average working class person, we need to keep trying, because what we're doing is right, and eventually people are going to realise that.
Good point,
Shall
Chris.
we mention some of our detractors recently before we decide to end?
Well, we'll finish on the detractors. I want to get Jason's view on this point first.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, I think next year will be, or potentially, a pivotal one for the working class, because the odds are that they will get a Labour government, a government of the self-proclaimed party of working people, and we will see firsthand what that sort of party really is. I hope that the working class, who are not as feckless and stupid as the ruling class think that they are, they will know that Labour offer absolutely nothing to working people. And with the alternatives being the Tories and the Labour Party, and both parties hating them, that maybe they need to do something about things for themselves. And they'll look at places like their hollowed out town centres with their closed down shops all over the place, the skyrocketing cost of living, the skyrocketing cost of heating your house and feeding your families, and might think, well, things are getting pretty bad and we need to do something new.
Well said, Jason. Do we want to then, unless there's anything else on that, should we move on to the comedy round, which is visiting some of our detractors? Who wants to go first?
Jason, I know you had a little bee in your bonnet you wanted to let out.
Oh, I just thought I wanted to say, if they're watching now live or they're watching in the future, thank you for tagging us as middle class, liberal, social democrat, and unemployed all at the same time. We are none of those things, to be absolutely clear. But unfortunately, you are part of the problem, in that you do what everyone on the modern left does when they lose an argument, which is about 2 tweets into an exchange, which is to say that you must be middle class, you must be university educated, you must be a social democrat or a liberal or an unemployed grifter trying to make a living out of the class consciousness project. So Merry Christmas, one and all.
I don't think no more needs to be said on that subject.
Right. I think this draws us to a neat conclusion, comrades. Has anybody got any final thoughts or Christmas wishes they want to spread in terms of cheer to the audience?
One thing I would like to say is, two of the great things that we did this year was our stall on the Wigan Diggers. That was really enjoyable. And even though it didn't have the greatest attendance, but the Red Books Fair, that was really good. And this year coming, we are really going to try to do more outside of internet-based and articles and stuff. We want to have more of a physical presence. So I'm looking forward to attending as many events as we can. And we also have our little football side that we like, where we find our team, and we're going to be going from there. So next year is going to be a very exciting time, and we're going to be trying to spread class awareness in every little corner we can.
Cheers, Rick. Chris?
I've got nothing else to say, because I agreed wholeheartedly with what Jason and Ricky said. I wanted to say, next year, I want to be surrounded by more people who hate me, because I've noticed a lot of celebrities have died lately, surrounded by loved ones. Henry Kissinger was nearly 100, wasn't he?
Yeah, the
And
hate
almost
keeps
the
you
entire
strong.
world hated them. So yeah, I want more people to hate me next year.
Well, I should get on Twitter
I'm going to
more
go out
often
of my
then,
way
Chris.
to make sure that happens.
All right. Jason, any final thoughts?
Well, and mine are slightly aligned with Ricky's. It's been a good year for the Class Consciousness Project. We are small in number, and we are spread a little thin across the country. But I think what we've done in the first 12 months has been really good. I wanted to say thank you to everyone who supported us over the last 12 months. Your support is very gratefully received, and wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Thank you, Jason.
There's a comment
And-
there saying it was Stalin's birthday, so we need to wish the
Well-
great man happy birthday.
Raise a glass to Comrade Stalin, who said just
Cheers,
before
Joe.
his death, "They'll dump garbage on my grave, but the winds of history will blow it away."
Amen to that.
Right. So thank you everybody who's tuned in tonight and contributed to what's been a very interesting chat. And we will probably be back with another live stream in the new year, seeing as this has gone quite well. But until then, we will wish you Merry Christmas, though not in the manner of John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and leave it at that. Thank you, comrades.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas.